without knowing what somebody's going through or their perspective, it's difficult and you can easily miss the point. Now, we have to be able to manage our emotions in the course of a business. But one of the first things I do ask now is how someone's feeling, just to see, to start the conversation.
Lawrence, he's the deputy to the head of internal audit at Adidas based in Germany with a staggering 14 years of experience in the industry. He's known for his solution-oriented mindset, adaptability, and unwavering commitment to teamwork and integrity.
You need to see the potential of what that person could do, and that should be for the leaders of the future. Or leaders of present, for that matter. So listening is really something I really see value, and I 100% agree.
So typically the first questions we like to ask, Lawrence, is me and Brandon are firm believers in somebody's earlier age being a key component into who they are today. And so I'd really like to understand, accounting background, typically we assume that, both parents were accountants. That's typically a storyline that people go through when they get into the industry, or they're looking for security because they come from more difficult backgrounds. So I'm really curious, what is your earlier start and how did it all begin?
I would say a bit of my story because of a family, because I'm from Hong Kong. I was born and raised there. Then I moved to Vancouver around about the age of 10. And as you mentioned, sometimes there might be influence from family. I would say business-wise, that wasn't where my family influence came from. I think I am the first one, I would say, having a chance or opportunity to study in a business school, and granted also with Sauder of the University of British Columbia. And I would say as a kickoff, really, I have my parents to thank for creating that opportunity as we move from Hong Kong to Canada. My journey, I think, in exploring both business, which is primarily my focus, and accounting became a component of it, actually goes back to maybe even a little bit back in high school, where I did not know I would go into business school. I did TA for an accounting teacher, but at that time in high school days, I was pretty interested in sciences, so physics, chemistry, whatnot, and even in my first year of university, I chose engineering. Now, having gone through that, maybe because of some influence from my peers, and later on I found my natural interest with business and commerce, I decided to make a pivot into business school with Sauder. And eventually in those times, there were several disciplines, if you will, that were pretty established, one of them being accounting. And as I explored, this was something that I felt interested to do. And I know it also offered a platform for me to also explore just different companies, different setups, really dive into the business world through the lens of accounting. And hence, I graduated with a degree of commerce, specializing in accounting.
That's interesting. You mentioned there, going from engineering to accounting as something that was easy or just kind of just happened. But I imagine there was probably a bit of a deeper story within that and why you made that switch. I'm curious.
I would say it's not all planned out. I think as I was doing engineering, I realized, in all honesty, it required basically almost 100% effort on my part, whereas I looked towards other classmates. They were much more naturally grasping a lot of the concepts, much more, let's say, dialed into all there is to the world of engineering. And I just felt, where is my natural affinity? Where's my interest, really? Because I was spending the time, I was managed to do well, but it was more a lot of grunt work, if you will. And I started to feel that's not really where my natural interests lie. And therefore, I was exploring and talking to many friends, trying to get a bit of immersion into what is it like in business school. And later, just took a bit of a leap of faith to change disciplines and move from the engineering school to the business school. So I would say it's definitely not planned for. We evolved along the way. And I think that's actually a good maybe theme throughout my career as well. Because I'm a professional internal auditor, I'm working in internal audit, and that's also something I discovered along the way, stumbled upon even, but not planned for even during my time at Sauder.
So Lawrence, I know that you've got your CPA, you're an internal audit, and I'm curious, before making the switch into business, what exactly about that sounded interesting to you? What were you so invested in? Because I know for these types of roles that it's very structured, it's very rigid. Is that the type of person you find yourself to be? Do you like these standardized processes?
I think a little bit of my personality is analytical, and then it also developed, let's say, different and more dimensions after spending some years in my role in internal audit. So there is a degree of structure, I would say, with business that you just need. And however, I would say that is more providing some tools and lens from which you can see the dynamics, and it's basically everything is game. I think in the business world, when we kind of refer back to our studies, you would have case studies, for example, and you look at how companies manage the challenges, be it's about financials, be it's about the branding and marketing, be it's about people and human resources. Doesn't really matter which discipline. I think through the lens of some of the structure and the tools in business school, it just equipped me to really understand a little bit better and I think prepare me for the start of a career, which, yes, indeed, I think like many of my peers, was with an accounting firm. And then briefly afterwards, it was when I discovered also my current profession, which is internal audit.
And then moving on, you start off your career in KPMG. How important were those formative years there? And did almost starting your career give you that impression that, okay, yes, this is what I wanted? Or did you have that moment where, ooh, did I really take the good career there? Were there any challenges along those starting years at KPMG?
Definitely. I actually, unlike my peers, I spent a very brief time at KPMG. And I think you asked a really good question. I think as much as it's a discovery of what your interests and what you really like and all that comes with it, it's also about discovering, being open-minded of what doesn't necessarily work for you. And I think in the days of the school and want to set the context for the audience, that was a time when there was no smartphones, or I didn't have one. There was a time when Facebook was just starting. So we need to put it into context that from a social media perspective, that it wasn't really out there. So you had a lot of maybe influence, or your discovery was very much reliant on your more immediate environment. Yes, there was Google, there was internet, you could do all the research. But I think fundamentally, you are looking for anchor points from the environment to which you are living in. And at that time, Sauder played a big part. And I think my formative years in the early career, I definitely do appreciate the platform from which any advisory work in a professional firm offers, no matter the brand, no matter the company. And that's something I still recognize and stand by. For example, my wife actually went through the big four accounting firms for many, many years. And so there are benefits to it. But I think shortly after, for me, I discovered that was not necessarily the path that I really wanted for more years. And I think it was similar to how I rediscovered business after spending a year in engineering. It seemed to be a bit of a theme where I was looking towards, on top of financial audit, which was where I started at KPMG, what are other disciplines or what are other roles that I could play that fit much more my personality, my skill sets, and actually where I want to explore further. And hence what I mentioned, I stumbled upon internal audit because at that time, I came across a trainee program that offered two disciplines. One was in investor relations and the other was in internal audit. And then with that experience, I stayed with it ever since. Because internal audit, yes, it's has similarities to audit, but often describe it as offering a door for you to really explore and discover what every aspect of business is about, internally, more the operational side of things. And it's a bit of a mini job change every now and then, because no project is really the same, or at least the version of internal audit in the companies I've worked for has been a bit of a discovery every now and then. And that just keeps it interesting. So again, a bit of a discovery, but I think my formative years at a professional firm was also really about, I get to experience and discover new companies every now and then, but really keeping an open mind of what's really working or not for myself.
As you progressed along your accounting journey and discovered what you liked, I noticed a major career shift in where you went from Hong Kong all the way to Germany. And to me, those sounds like polar opposites. Was there anything you had to overcome and adapt to in order to make that leap of faith?
Yes. I'll start with the more personal side of things, because I think career development and any career progression, I think generally that there's a certain frame that you can think about it. But for me, what was different was I was more or less recently married. At the time, myself and my wife was deciding whether to make a move and what kind of move. I think we were both have spent a number of years already, 8 years in our respective companies, where we felt we've developed and we have had good experience in the roles and the companies we've had, but it has reached a plateau. And I think an additional part was really looking for a new life experience. And for me, I have lived in Hong Kong, and Canada has been a bigger part of me. And also my wife has spent some time in Canada as well. We just decided an opportunity came up for myself and later on my wife also to join Adidas in Germany. Such opportunities don't come by easily. And we felt, well, we could continue on Hong Kong. And I think the natural choice would also be to find an English-speaking country, because that is one of the challenges, because in Germany you have to learn German, and I'm a little bit embarrassed about that because I'm still learning the very level of German after 6 years spending time here. And that's a large part. On the other hand, thankful to Adidas, because it's a very international community where we are. But nonetheless, that would be one of the bigger challenges, language, because it ties so much to every aspect of living, including your social circle. So we don't have family, and we have some colleagues whom we're in good relationship with, but I think a big part is the language. It just makes it so much different when you're living here for years and in a longer period of time. That's really the number one challenge. But I think when we were making the decision to move from Hong Kong to Germany, it's really a large part to do with just that desire, if you will, to explore and try a different part of working in a different part of the world. And for example, we've both lived in Canada, we've both lived in Hong Kong, and we've not lived or worked in Europe before. So that was one of the bigger decisions I would say we've made in our life, and we just took that leap of faith and have not regretted. And it's still going on, but my phase of life has also evolved as I have a little kid. So that has continued our journey here in Germany.
Before we dig in, Lawrence, into Adidas and kind of the leadership position and what you've learned there, you mentioned there how you and your wife progressed through different phases of your life together. And, I'm sure a big part of, Brennan's in a pretty solid relationship. I'm single and different members on our team, but it's obviously a topic, right? Relationships and how they play a role. And that's what I always say to my friends is when you find that partner, it creates such a rock and such a place of certainty where you can take on bigger challenges together. And it really seems to echo in your relationship. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, it's the one that makes it work, because when we first decided to move to Germany, we had a plan of, let's say, 2 to 3 years. I think it's pretty common to And then two big events came. Of course, we all went through a pandemic in 2020. And then my kid also arrived. So I think for us, there are many, many challenges that come up, both from a personal side of things and professionally, that's also normal. And at the end, how much you can navigate and get through and overcome your challenges. And there are some days that are very tough. And you need to look towards your better half and really rely on each other's support. And I would say there would be days where we kind of take turns. One of us are super down or just frustrated or just upset about certain things. And you really need to rely on each other. Sometimes it might be even both of you. But however, I think as the relation develops and as your life experiences kind of support you in solidifying, I would say, the relationship or testing it in different ways, shapes, and form, that just propels you. Because I see career so much tied into your life, and life is actually the bigger part. And you can change companies, you can change roles, but that's definitely something I would say is your relationship is the one that you have to put in high priority, and it will be tested. Especially kind of going back to your earlier question, moving to Germany, continue to live here has its unique challenges, just between myself, my wife, and now we have a little kid. And so it's really fundamental to kind of keep an eye definitely to manage and continue to develop and invest in the relationships you have, because career would not continue to develop without that foundation. And so I thank my wife for that, and we rely on each other to continue on.
I see that building teams and building a one-on-one relationship has a lot of similarities in the sense that it gets tested time over time, and it's constantly evolving, constantly growing, and you never truly know what comes next. Do you have any leadership principles or philosophies that you follow in your senior leadership role in Adidas?
I've learned many things along the way. I'm still learning. I think the number one is it would be continuous. There's never a right answer. There are certain situations or maybe some components that, yes, there's what it should be considered a right thing to do. But I think leadership is so much about the individuals who you've been given charge of, whom you also, on the other side, I try to think about it, is you have the privilege to influence and spend some time on the way, because people come and go. Like, there's only a certain amount of time that you would spend with your colleagues. Even if someone dedicates their entire career to one single company, there will still be a time that you'll part ways. So I try to keep in mind that do what's best, and it's really important, because it's as much you need to make sure you have the energy and also the well-being and also what's good for the other person, as well as also for your company, depending on your role. You also need to make sure that you have the right energy, the mindset to take care of those around you. I think that would be one of the bigger learnings I've had since taking up a leadership role. I think the other one is, for me, more personal. Takes courage to try things. But I also still stick by the principle, finding the approach that you think is going to support an individual, let's say your team member, even if that might not be what it's like. Because I think part of the leadership journey is also, sometimes it's called making tough decisions, or maybe you have to do certain things which you have to have a good concept and value system back and what is right, but that might not be liked. And that's the challenge of leadership as well, is how do you see maybe beyond or support somebody, but also keep an open mind that even if you try to do things right, that might not be the best solution. So the other part, I think, is just making sure that I myself think of what would be the right solution for the time, and be open-minded about learning from any mistakes that come from it, But I think just keeping in mind that you're trying to do what's right, either by the people, by the company, and that will kind of continue to steer your path onwards. No matter the challenge, and leadership does have a lot of those come up along the way.
It's very interesting that you talk about taking care of people, because the more I speak to leaders, the more I realize being a leader is really about just taking care of your team, and kind of the rest almost happens by itself. And I'll share something that happened yesterday during our team meeting, Lawrence. Brandon can attest to it. So I ran this thought experiment. I read it in the book that the most important thing to ask your teams is, why will this idea fail? And it puts you in a mindset to go over your biases that you have of optimism and sunk costs, of fallacy, and all these different biases that humans have. And so we start doing the experiment, and the things that start coming out of it is that, oh, my team is mainly comprised of students, and they're a bit nervous. They have anxiety that they might not land internships in the summer. They have a lot of schoolwork. How will they mitigate that with the company's time? And so instantly my brain thought, okay, how can I take care of them, right? How can I protect them? So I went to WhatsApp and texted them a message saying that I'll help you. I thought we can implement a mentorship program and try to connect the people with the guests we've had on to maybe help them land internship opportunities, challenge them, give them good experiences, build their knowledge. So these are the things I started thinking about when taking care of people. Now I'm just curious, is there anything, like when you say taking care of people, that's very vague. That can mean a lot of things. What specifically do you do to take care of people? Is it, I've heard from L'Oreal president, it's he takes chats. Every week he goes on a chat with his team. What do you do specifically to give that sense that you're taking care of your team and that you're protecting them?
I take a step back. I think it's listening. That's really essential. I think we all have our own experiences, and like I mentioned, try to do what's right. But without knowing what somebody's going through or their perspective, it's difficult, and you can easily miss the point. Or even if it's not about missing a point, at least you understand where the differences may be, what someone might be motivated by, or what they may be concerned with. It could be professional, it could be personal. So I think the one thing that's very tangible is to have those conversations, and more regularly than not. And so it's also a culture which I really appreciate within my team, not just myself with the team members I'm working closely with, but also it's in the wider team setting that my leader also sets. So I think it's a ripple effect. It's not myself as a singular person. Yes, I have my area of responsibility and leadership, but I also have peers who do the same, and I also have my own leaders. So I think it's a bigger part of the culture to firstly understand, and it goes a long way. Whether you can do what people ask for, of course not. Like leaders cannot, just because there's so many different needs and perspectives. But I think the one thing is to really listening and try to be catered, try to offer solutions or suggestions which was catered to the individual, because everyone is so different. We may be talking about, let's say, a common need across the team, but how it comes up, or how someone perceives it, or how someone would latch on a specific idea even, it's very different. And even I would say this year for me has been also a lot of learning from that. How can I even go further? And people can talk about being empathetic and listening, but really in practice, there's so many degrees of how you can be empathetic and listening and trying to understand someone's needs, and then trying to give your own advice of what you've gone through. I think at the end, that's one of the things I see benefits from experience is not to let that hold you back, but if there's a path that's been taken, if there's some learnings from it, share, and let the team members, let the other person take what's good from it, but not necessarily make a copy and paste, because all situations are different. So I think listening and trying to find a catered approach, and also share your learning, share the advices, and being open-minded to listen and hear are some of the more practical things.
It's interesting you mentioned there, Lawrence, when someone is telling you something difficult, and what you do basically, you tell them a story, right? You say something, you don't just give them advice that's coming from nowhere. You tell them something that happened in your life, an experience, a knowledge, and then you're sharing it as a story to connect with them, and really emphasizes with kind of this podcast is about, which is about storytelling and how it's a way more powerful way to connect with people and to resonate with somebody.
Yeah. And Lawrence, I believe what you were kind of trying to express was that people are really diverse, and there's always diversity in workplaces wherever you go. I know you spoke at a conference about embracing diverse talents, and people often react really differently to even the same situations. I'm wondering, when you give your advice, when you listen to these people, are there any specific questions that you like to ask to better know how you can help this one individual?
Yeah, that's a very deep question because diversity has so many dimensions, and I think for me, it's diversity of background, and you have to consider not just at the point, let's say you embrace diversity, but also what's the supporting network to also continue to sustain that to happen. And one of the themes I spoke to was on how do we develop the next generation of internal auditors. So, and hence that is one of the themes. I think to your question, I often ask nowadays more how people's feeling. Just like how I ask my kid, actually. I learned that from my kid because it's not to say the people, the team members I work with, of course, they're adults and professionals, but I think in terms of diversity and recognizing difference in background and perceptions and even values, like the feelings is one of the starting points. Like we're humans, like we have individually emotions. No matter what we're talking about on business, that is a factor. Now we have to be able to manage our emotions in the course of a business. But one of the first things I do ask now is how someone's feeling, just to see, to start the conversation. And it's also to put into perspective that individual is more important than any other aspects that we're going to talk about. At least the starting point should be about that individual. So I try to ask somebody nowadays how they're feeling, have a bit of an early conversation, how maybe recent, how they were doing recently, including personally. And I suppose you experienced that when we first dialed it. And I asked, how are you feeling? How are you doing? So for me, this is the number one question.
Okay. As a tradition on this podcast, for our final question, we'd like to get your thoughts on a quote that was left by the previous guest. And I believe this quote is super relevant to what we were just talking about. The quote comes from a thought leader from McGill. He's a professor at McGill and he teaches leadership. So the quote goes, "Being an excellent listener is one of the most important leadership qualities." What are your thoughts?
And setting, it's there's elements of it, but I think leadership is fundamentally about listening because every situation is so different. And we talked briefly about diversity. We talked about team and taking care of a team. And I think listening is the fundamental part. So I 100% agree with that quote. And I think eventually it opens the door because there's two ways, both listening as a leader, but I think the person you talk to, like one of the mindset I would have is that's a potential leader someday, right? It's not a fixed relationship. Like both sides would evolve, both sides grow, including myself. And so I think listening is really important, and it goes a long way because it's also about role model and setting example, because that's somebody that you're talking to and trying to work with closely. You need to see the potential of what that person could go in, and that should be the leaders of the future or leaders of present for that matter. So listening is really something I really see value, and I 100% agree.
Yeah, Lawrence, there's been a lot of golden nuggets in this conversation, and definitely something to think about, that the leadership model has changed. It's not this, galvanizing, charismatic, trying to motivate your troops anymore, which it still is at times. But I think it really transitioned into listening and making the person and the team member at the forefront of leadership as opposed to the leader himself, which I think is so important nowadays. Thank you so much, Lawrence.
Thank you, Lawrence.
You're welcome. And I feel this concept of leadership has evolved tremendously. And the elements you also spoke to, you have to have those as well, like being decisive, maybe galvanizing, bringing people together. Like those are still required, I would say. But I think it has expanded. And I think the world can have more versions of leaders, and doesn't have to be maybe the typical ones that we relate to, maybe in the press or whatnot. So I think there's just different forms of leadership, and I often also tell others, it doesn't have to be tied to a role. Like you can have elements of being a leader at any given point in time. It's a continuous journey. You never all of a sudden fit to a leadership position. All of a sudden those come, yes, formally, officially, sometimes that is true. But in practice, there's ways to practice leadership, and I think it's something that's going to be continuous. And yes, definitely, the leadership concept has evolved, and I think the world can have more versions of what leadership.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode. As a growing channel, it would be so amazing if you would take one more minute of your day to reshare this episode on any platform you're liking. Hope to see you next week.